Hi, my name is Wes Overton, and we're going to preview the sequences lessons for Algebra 1. So with sequences, on the first lesson, we're going to start with visual patterns, with the idea being we want students to kind of informally look at these patterns and start to see them as sequences. So a couple things, we have a mix of arithmetic and geometric sequences, or what they have seen before with linear and exponential functions. These visual patterns come from visualpatterns.org, where there's over 200 visual patterns that are available, so that's a good resource to use if students need a little more help with this. So the idea here is, one, this is an informal introduction to sequences. We're not going to get caught up on this first lesson on how to write the rules and recursive rules and stuff like that. We are going to foreshadow some stuff that we will do later in the unit. So a couple things is, it's kind of a low floor, high ceiling task, in that most students will be able to write the fourth step of the sequence. And the idea is we want them looking at the sequence or the pattern to see how it is growing. So what they're doing here when they describe how you would find the next step, that is foreshadowing writing rules recursively, because most students are able to do that, especially when they work in the groups. So as they write how you would find the next step, that foreshadows recursive sequences, or defining sequences recursively. Then on this, when they define a rule for the nth step, there's multiple ways to correctly define these sequences or these patterns, and that's foreshadowing multiple ways to write functions or define functions or write rules. So from there, the next lesson is we're going to use these same sequences or these same patterns, and we're going to kind of formalize the definitions and the notation. So we're going to introduce arithmetic and geometric sequences. We want them looking at the patterns and recognizing how to find the next one. And this is big when we start to introduce the recursive formula. We want them to write it out in words first. I think that helps students. Recursive formulas are new to them, and the notation can confuse them at first. So like on this one, the pattern was just to add 2. So what we're doing is we're finding the previous term plus 2. So let's say we want to find the 5th term. Well, if I'm looking at the 5th term, one way to find the 5th term would just be to look at the 4th term and add 2. Well, there's my 4th term right there, which is 14. So the 5th term, I just add 2 to that, so that must mean the 5th term is 16. So kind of doing it like that and explaining that recursive formula in words will help students understand how to write that. So then when we go to the formal notation, we could use this same example of, when we were trying to find the 5th term of a sequence, we looked at the 5 minus 1, the 4th term, and we added 2. And they also need to understand, which is a good review of function notation, that is the output of the function when the input is 4. So this is the 4th term, which is 14 plus 2. And then we'll go over the explicit rule, which is similar to what they've seen before when we've worked with linear and exponential functions. Now, you will notice these rules written with function notation. So that goes to the new Alabama Course of Study standards. So the standards that deal with sequences are 22 and 25, and both of those standards are in the function domain. So it says that students will define sequences as functions. So that tells us right there, we're looking at sequences through a functions lens. So previously, you might see sequences written with subscript, like a sub 1 for the first term, or a sub 2 for the second term. We're simply just going to write that in the familiar function notation, a sub 1, or a of 1, and then a of 2. Okay, when they write the rules, instead of saying a sub n, we're going to write it a of n, Or for the previous term, instead of a sub n minus 1, we could write that of a of n minus 1. So a simple change. Actually, I think it helps students understand it more because it's something familiar with them. A lot of times students would struggle with that subscript notation because it was new to them. But writing it with the function notation, one, aligns with the standards, and two, I think it makes it easier on students because that is what they are used to. So then we will move from that for the third lesson is just giving students an opportunity to practice with formulas, both recursive and explicit. So they are working on either we give them the recursive rule and they have to give us a term number, or we give them an explicit rule and they have to find the term number. They can convert. So like on here we have some explicit rules and we're asking them to convert it to the recursive rule. Or we could do the reverse of that, give them the recursive rule and ask them to convert it to explicit rule. So it's just one of those things that students just need some practice with. And there's some outlines, strategy practice outlines in the scope and sequence. But my name is Wes Overton, and this has been a review of sequences.